Yes, in the back? All right, cool. All right, so my name is Greg Guannel. I'm with the Nature Conservancy. That was a very interesting presentation. I will take a more, I think, engineering approach, because that's my background, so it won't be as pleasant to the eye, but hopefully it will be an interesting story. And the main question that I'm going to try to explore with you is, how can we thrive, how can urban system can thrive by taking into account the role and the value of nature. So South Florida, all of you, I think most of you in the room are from here or actually live here. And we live here for a reason. It's a very attractive place. It's a very beautiful place. But it's a place that is defined by its architecture. And I think that Dennis and other people at the School of Architecture are probably very proud of the legacy of their work. But that's basically what defines Miami, and it defines Miami so much that basically that's pretty much all you see. That's pretty much what defines our growth, and incidentally, that's what defines our happiness. At least if you follow the news. And when there's trouble, when there's problems, then engineers come in. And engineers come in, and they come up with solutions. They can move water, even if, I think this pump here can move water uphill if necessary, to really solve the problem and maintain the sort of built environment that we have created. And so I think that the development sort of model that we created can be represented by this diagram where we define a healthy community, a healthy environment as basically this interaction between the built infrastructure and the social infrastructure, the communities and the link among themselves. And that's how we define happiness. And I think that to a certain extent it worked, but I think that it's not ideal. There are a few problems. And I look at it this way because I'm from the Nature Conservancy and I want to propose a different way of looking at it mostly. And this way is motivated by this, that you've experienced, on a regular basis. Those pictures at the top were taken after just a regular rainfall event, not the big rainfall that we had last year, not a hurricane, no nothing, just some regular rainfall. And if, a lot of our streets are flooded for days on end. This was the day after a regular rainfall event. This was during a rainfall event that lasted half an hour, and half the parking lot was underwater. This was during a relatively mild tropical storm where a lot of the existing infrastructure has been flooded. So it's not, talking about a Sandy or anything like that. That was just a tropical storm. And then you have, in addition to all this sort of problem due to flooding and others, you have this sort of congestion that is, a result of the choice that we made of where we build and how we build and how we decide to move from one place to another. And some of these problems, and I could go on and on about the list of problems, but you get the picture. And some of those problems that we talked about, I think are getting amplified. The symptom of those, or the experience of those problems are getting amplified by climate change. It's getting hotter, seas are rising, rainfall patterns changing, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have fire, which is a good thing, but we pretty much have all the ills represented by in this picture. And I think that the work and all of you followed happening in Miami Beach is an example of how we have to deal with those problems that really have been with us for a long time. And the consequence is that not only our infrastructure is basically reaching its limit, but us humans, we are also feeling the consequence of that. We are not happy. And even if we didn't have climate change, even if we didn't have the regular flooding, I think that there is this sort of understanding that there's something not quite right about the way that we decide our development model to be. We're not as happy as we really want it to be. And so basically the type of direction that I think we want to go is really trying to maybe revisit this model of development to this model of development where we still have to rely on the built infrastructure to kind of define the place we live, but maybe think about integrating the role of green infrastructure, the role of nature into this sort of development model. So what is green infrastructure? There are, as for resilience, there are different definitions for green infrastructure. But I really like this one here, where it says that green infrastructure is an interconnected network of natural areas and other open space that conserve ecosystems' value and function. And those are, some of those ecosystem services provided. But basically providing ecosystem values and function to benefit people and wildlife. So it's this sort of understanding that, we need to move forward with a new sort of model for development where we take into account the benefits that nature provides to us, in addition to the benefits that nature provides to wildlife. And I think this picture here of my son kind of exemplifies a little bit of what I mean by green infrastructure. So this was during another sort of rain event, just a normal, regular rain event. And as you can see, a lot of this playground, which could be maybe somebody's house or whatever structure, is relatively dry. Most of the water is now pooling into this region. So you, without big sort of investment in big infrastructure, you can protect your existing dwelling or whatever you want by really taking to advantage the fact that this green space here serves as stormwater retention area. In addition, it serves as a recreation area. Well, in some cases, maybe not recreating in it if you are if the water quality might not be as good as here, but it can, when it's not serving as a stormwater retention area, it can provide some recreation benefits. In addition to, again, replenishing our groundwater, a source of fresh water, et cetera, et cetera. So the bottom line is that here we can use a green infrastructure as a way to improve the quality of our lives without maybe sacrificing too much into the sort of model of development that we've decided. So I'm just gonna, maybe expand a little bit more about this sort of interaction between green infrastructure and the built and social infrastructure. So I think this picture sort of summarizes the sort of relationship between human and nature. And Alexander von Humboldt, who was the greatest man since the deluge, according to the King of Prussia, and the mentor of Darwin and Goethe, said that nature everywhere speaks to a man in a voice that is familiar to his soul. And I think, you understand this. I think you understand at a fundamental level what he's trying to get at. And, there's been a lot of studies that basically showed in a scientific way how important nature is for our well-being, for our health, not only physical health, mental health, et cetera, and how, being exposed to nature really strengthens society at a very strong, deep level. The other aspect of this interaction, of this model of future model of development, is the interaction between the green infrastructure and the built infrastructure, and that's where engineering comes in. So one definition of green infrastructure, if we look at it this way, can be taken from the EPA, where green infrastructure is a cost-effective, resilient approach to managing wet weather impact. So here they're looking at it as the same way I presented to you guys earlier, which is really sort of help dealing with any sort of flooding, stormwater type issues, where you really use the benefits of natural system at sort of storing this water, reducing its volume to protect what you have at a relatively minimum cost, because this structure can basically take care of itself while it provides you with this very important service. Unfortunately, in Miami, we do not have a lot of example of this sort of interaction between the built environment and the green infrastructure. And I think that's because of the decision we made of putting nature over here and then decided that we as a society, we're going to live here where it's mostly built environment. But you can find example of this interaction in some of the few parks that we have, where if you look at this picture here, you can see, okay, you have your recreation or your human activity happening in one location, and in another location you have, nearby, you have all this plant material and all those ecosystems that really provides, that really are the basis of all the other sort of aspects of life. But here we basically have the two merged together, where we start to enjoy the benefits of nature, not only from a recreation point of view, but in terms of heat reduction benefits that they provide, stormwater mitigation that they provide, groundwater recharge services that they provide that will then help us have access to fresh water at a lower cost later, in addition to all the plant material along the bank of this lake that help filter water to improve water quality so we are not exposed to dirty water that can later harm our health. So the point that I really want to make is that nature provides a lot of service, a lot of benefits to us humans. We talked earlier about coastal protection, or we talked about we can talk about flood attenuation during rainstorm, but there's a whole host of service that nature provides us with, and unfortunately, when we decide to build our cities, when we decide to build the place we live, we really do not take those into account. We tend to put them to the side, and I think that's a loss for us, because really sort of, in the few examples where you can start to take into account the benefits that nature provides, you can look at, the important economic benefits that you can get. And this sort of translation into economic benefits, I think it's important because it's one way to start really sort of convincing of the necessity to move beyond just the recreation and the beautiful aspect of nature to really the necessity of integrating natural systems into our infrastructure when we decide to build. So the question is, how can we do it? It's nice to talk about it, it's nice to think about it, but how can we do it? And so I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but basically the two main approaches that we are taking is really sort of thinking about how we can promote and apply low-impact development principle when we think about cities and the future of cities and sort of changing this sort of development model. And then the second part is really sort of reconnecting people with nature, recreating opportunities for you to sort of go back to your original desire of being connected with something bigger than you. And so those are some examples of where it has been, where we start to do that in cities. This is in DC, where you have a parking lot that is, flooded on a regular basis by, moderate storm event. And they placed those series of bioswales that didn't really affect the quality of the parking a lot at all, reduced flooding during that rain event. And in addition to those sort of very infrastructure type output, provides you with basically a more pleasant experience when you go to church. So you start to sort of tap into the sort of infrastructure, green infrastructure sort of interaction, but also into the sort of green infrastructure, but also social infrastructure benefits that nature provides. This is another example of a bioswale in Seattle where they re-engineered a whole streetscape to really sort of take into account the benefits of nature to improve the quality of their neighborhoods with some sacrifices, but still maintaining the same type of built environment that they had before. So the last few slides that I'm going to talk about are a project where we try to implement some of those concepts here in Miami, and we're going to start in Wagner Creek, which is this little body of water here that flows into the Miami River. Wagner Creek in the past was the biggest contributor of fresh water to the Miami River, which is very interesting to think about when you look at it right now. So this whole area used to be, as you know, before development, a whole natural area. There was a massive source of spring here that fed Wagner Creek. This spring is lost, and now it's being transformed into a park. And this is where the spring was actually bubbling and coming out of the water, and now basically receive the drainage, some of the storm water that accumulates into the park. Unfortunately, we won't be able to address this issue, but we can still take care of the creek itself and the natural features along the creek itself. So going back to my point earlier about the decisions we have made in terms of development model here in Miami between basically saying, the built infrastructure and the social infrastructure is what defines us. We basically not only, as you saw in the previous picture, not only decided to pretty much remove any trace of natural systems, natural processes from our urban landscape, but the few remaining amount of natural systems that exist are basically fenced off and we create all sort of mechanisms, physical and otherwise, and psychological, to basically transmit the message that, we cannot be in contact with this body of water at all costs. And the reason is because we decided that it's going to provide us with one service, which is evacuating all of our storm water, and it becomes a drainage ditch. Drainage is not only for stormwater, but all sort of weird things that we decide to discharge into it. And so these natural features, this natural wonder in a way is being lost because we integrate it into our built infrastructure, discarding any natural element to it. But nature is interesting because nature is coming back in a different way. So these pictures show impact of sea level rise that start to affect the urban environment that you can observe along the creek. And so sea level rise, really threaten, and climate change, as I said, sort of threaten our decision to build and our decision to use natural system and our decision to basically use the space. And so I think that in addition to really the sort of recognition that fundamentally we are not as happy or as fulfilled as human as we want it to be because of our development model, we also realize that our infrastructure that we build that really define ourselves is now threatened. And so we have to make a decision. And this decision, and I would love to sort of, our intent is sort of to kind of push this decision about what to be done about the future of our city. We would love to sort of push it into the direction of really sort of reconnecting with nature and reusing the power and the benefits that nature provides us with in order to avoid this sort of continuing, this sort of cycle of looking away from nature and in the same time degrading the quality of our lives. So the first thing we need to recognize is that despite of its problem, being the most polluted water body in the state of Florida, despite being fenced off and accessible to human, this waterway is full of life. Every time I go there, it's amazing the amount of wildlife that I can see. This is a picture of a little lonely bird, but there are lots of crabs, there are turtles that go into the water. Somebody saw manatees once in a while. There's a picture of manatees going up and down this canal. So it's really full of wildlife. So as we think about the future of Miami, this idea of saying, okay, let's stop what the sort of path we're on and go back maybe to a different, and maybe change course and go to a slightly different path where we actually reconnect with nature, I think is possible because nature and the benefits provided with nature, in this case recreation and probably mental health, are still there. The service, those benefits are still there. And so the idea is to start small, but really try to kind of demonstrate the fact that we can restore our built environment in a way where all the flow of ecosystem services are restored to not only improve our quality of life in terms of reducing flooding, which, stormwater flooding is a big problem, so creating a series of bioswale and stormwater retention areas, but at the same time using those natural spaces as a way to sort of reconnect with nature. And so those are just kind of example of what other people have done in sort of similar environment to kind of really sort of take into restoring those flow of ecosystem services in addition to, again, reconnecting people with nature and improving thereby our quality of life. So as I mentioned, going back to this quote by Humboldt, we have the opportunity by working in Wagner Creek, with different entities to sort of, providing people, removing those fence, removing those sort of looking away from the creek and providing people with a sense of place and using nature to sort of improve our sort of daily quality of life, mental and physical health, in addition to just, all the sort of infrastructure benefits that those systems will provide us with. So it's a very engineering way of looking at it. It's some way I can see similarities between your way of looking at it and mine, from my point of view, of sort of using nature as a way to satisfy a need, but to really improve our well-being. And hopefully this sort of small little effort that we will sort of try to demonstrate, to really create a dialogue about what this new model can be. Hopefully, it can be replicated elsewhere within the city and within the county to sort of come up with this maybe new proposition for this urban development model. So in conclusion, this was a picture taken during a tree planting event I participated in, very small scale, but it's one step towards sort of realizing this vision that the way we build is not working for us. But so in conclusion, what I've been trying to tell you so far is that basically urban development has improved our living condition. I mean, we live in cities for a reason, so there is no denying that the built environment improved our lives in general as humans. However, we may be reaching the limit of our model. We might need a new model for urbanism. I'm not an urbanist, I'm not a planner, but I think that we probably need a new model. And what I'm proposing is that the existing model can be updated to really sort of thinking about now the services provided by nature. Nature provides us with a series of incredible services that are there, that never go away. And maybe we can update our existing sort of development model to try to take advantage and reintroduce the delivery of those services into our lives. And what we're going to try to do is testing this approach in Miami, starting with Wagner Creek, and hopefully, try to see if we can replicate this type of approach elsewhere. Thank you.